Picture this. You're lying in a hospital bed, slowly emerging from darkness after 3 weeks in a coma following a devastating car accident. Your family surrounds you with tears of relief as you open your eyes for the first time. The doctors ask you simple questions to assess your cognitive function: your name, the date, where you are. You open your mouth to respond in English, the only language you've ever known. But what comes out is fluent Mandarin Chinese, then flawless Arabic, then perfect Russian. You're speaking 7 different languages with native-level proficiency, and you have absolutely no idea how or why. This is the impossible story of Ben Morrison, a 32-year-old construction worker from Brisbane, Australia, who went into a coma speaking only English and woke up as a polyglot, with abilities that neuroscientists still can't fully explain. His case has forced researchers to reconsider everything they thought they knew about language acquisition, brain plasticity, and the hidden capabilities of the human mind. Ben didn't just recover from a traumatic brain injury, he emerged with skills that typically require decades of study and practice, skills he never consciously learned. But how does someone acquire fluency in multiple languages while unconscious? How does a brain that's supposed to be shutting down to heal instead develop linguistic abilities that most people spend lifetimes trying to achieve? And what does Ben's extraordinary case reveal about the untapped potential hidden within every human brain? The answer lies in understanding that sometimes the most profound changes happen not when we're actively learning, but when our conscious mind steps aside and lets the brain reorganize itself in ways we don't yet understand. Ben Morrison's story begins not with the accident that changed his life, but with the ordinary existence that came before it, a life that gave no hint of the extraordinary transformation waiting to emerge from tragedy. Ben grew up in a working-class suburb of Brisbane, the son of a truck driver and a supermarket cashier. His childhood was unremarkable in most ways: average grades in school, passion for rugby, plans to follow his father into blue-collar work that would provide steady income without requiring university education. "I was never the smart kid," Ben recalls. "I struggled with school, barely passed my exams, and the idea of learning another language seemed completely beyond me. I took French in high school for 2 years, and couldn't string together a simple sentence. Languages just didn't make sense to my brain." Ben's academic struggles with language learning weren't unusual. Millions of people find foreign languages difficult to master despite years of formal instruction, but his complete inability to retain even basic French vocabulary suggested that his brain simply wasn't wired for multilingual processing. After leaving school at 16, Ben worked various construction jobs, eventually becoming a skilled carpenter specializing in renovation work. His life was structured around physical labor, weekend rugby matches, time with mates at the pub, and a long-term relationship with his girlfriend Sarah, who worked as a dental assistant. The accident that would change everything happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March 2019. Ben was driving home from a job site when a delivery truck ran a red light and crashed into the driver's side of his vehicle at high speed. The impact was catastrophic. Ben suffered severe head trauma, multiple fractures, and internal injuries that required immediate emergency surgery. "The doctors told us Ben might not survive the night," Sarah remembers. "His brain had suffered massive trauma, and they couldn't predict whether he would ever wake up, and if he did, what kind of cognitive function he might have." Ben remained in a medically induced coma for 3 weeks while his brain swelling subsided and his other injuries stabilized. During this time, his brain was supposedly in a state of minimal activity, resting, healing, conserving energy for the enormous task of recovering from trauma. But something extraordinary was happening in Ben's unconscious mind during those 3 weeks, something that neuroscientists would later describe as one of the most remarkable cases of spontaneous skill acquisition ever documented. When Ben finally began emerging from his coma, the medical team performed standard cognitive assessments to determine what level of brain function he had retained. They expected to find significant impairments, memory loss, confusion, difficulty with language and motor skills. What they found instead defied every expectation and medical understanding. Dr. Rachel Park, the neurologist supervising Ben's recovery, later described the moment she realized something unprecedented was occurring. "I asked Ben to tell me his name and where he was, standard orientation questions. He responded clearly and correctly, but he was speaking in what I initially thought was confused babbling. Then I realized he was speaking fluent Mandarin Chinese. I called in a colleague who spoke Mandarin, and she confirmed that Ben was using perfect grammar and sophisticated vocabulary." The medical team initially thought Ben was confused, or that his brain injury had somehow activated random linguistic fragments, but when they continued testing, the situation became even more bewildering. Ben could speak, read, and write in 7 languages with native or near-native proficiency: Mandarin Chinese, Arabic, Russian, Portuguese, Hindi, Japanese, and Korean. He could switch between languages effortlessly, translate complex concepts accurately, and even understood cultural nuances and idiomatic expressions that typically require years of cultural immersion to master. Most remarkably, Ben could still speak English. His native language hadn't been replaced by the new languages. Instead, his linguistic capabilities had somehow expanded to include multiple language systems that he had never consciously studied or been exposed to in any significant way. I remember waking up and trying to talk to Sarah, but the words coming out of my mouth weren't English, Ben explains. I could understand English perfectly, but when I tried to speak, different languages just came out naturally. It felt completely normal to me, like I had always known these languages. It took me days to realize that what was happening wasn't normal at all. The medical team's initial theory was that Ben must have been exposed to these languages at some point in his life, perhaps through family connections, childhood experiences, or media consumption that his conscious mind had forgotten but his brain had somehow retained and suddenly accessed. But thorough investigation revealed that Ben had virtually no exposure to any of the languages he now spoke fluently. His family was monolingual English-speaking with no immigrant background. He had never traveled outside Australia. His media consumption was limited to English-language television and music. His social circle included no native speakers of any of the languages he had acquired. We couldn't find any plausible source for Ben to have learned these languages through conventional exposure, Dr. Park explains. He hadn't taken classes, didn't have immigrant friends or family, hadn't traveled to countries where these languages were spoken. There was simply no explanation for how he could have acquired native-level fluency in 7 different languages. The case attracted attention from neuroscientists and linguists worldwide, who recognized that Ben's situation challenged fundamental understanding of how language acquisition works. Dr. Michael Chen, a leading researcher in neurolinguistics at MIT, traveled to Brisbane to study Ben's case firsthand. What makes Ben's case extraordinary isn't just that he gained language abilities, it's the level of proficiency he achieved, Dr. Chen explains. Native-level fluency requires not just vocabulary and grammar, but internalization of pronunciation, rhythm, cultural context, and intuitive understanding that typically requires years of immersive exposure. Ben possessed all of this across 7 different languages despite never having studied any of them. Dr. Chen's team conducted extensive testing using advanced neuroimaging to understand what had happened in Ben's brain during his coma. The results revealed something that had never been documented before: massive reorganization of Ben's language processing centers in ways that created new neural pathways for multilingual processing. Ben's brain had essentially rewired itself during the coma, Dr. Chen explains. Language processing areas that typically handle only 1 or 2 languages had expanded and reorganized to accommodate multiple language systems simultaneously. It was like his brain had used the coma period to build entirely new neural architecture. But this explanation raised more questions than it answered. If Ben had never been exposed to these languages, where did the linguistic information come from? How did his brain construct accurate vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation for 7 different language systems without any input or practice? The research team's most controversial theory involved what they called latent linguistic templates, the possibility that human brains contain inherent structural frameworks for language that can potentially be activated even without traditional learning. Human brains may possess more innate language capacity than we've previously understood, Dr. Chen proposes. Perhaps Ben's brain injury and subsequent reorganization activated linguistic processing capabilities that exist in all humans, but normally remain dormant unless deliberately developed through learning and practice. This theory suggested that the human capacity for language might be far greater than conventional understanding assumed, that perhaps everyone possesses latent abilities to process multiple languages that simply aren't accessed through normal development and learning. Ben's case also revealed unexpected cognitive benefits beyond just language acquisition. His memory had improved significantly compared to pre-accident function, his pattern recognition abilities were enhanced, and he demonstrated problem-solving skills that exceeded his previous capabilities. It was like the brain reorganization that gave me languages also upgraded other cognitive functions, Ben explains. I could remember details that I used to forget, see patterns in information that I used to miss, understand complex concepts that used to confuse me. The accident somehow made me smarter in ways that went beyond just language. These cognitive enhancements suggested that Ben's brain reorganization during the coma had created broader neural efficiency rather than just activating specific language capabilities. His case became evidence for theories about neuroplasticity, suggesting that the human brain possesses far greater adaptive potential than conventional understanding recognizes. But Ben's extraordinary abilities also created practical challenges for his daily life. The spontaneous language switching that felt natural to him was confusing and disturbing to people around him who couldn't understand what he was saying or why he couldn't simply speak English consistently. For the first few months after waking up, I couldn't control which language would come out when I tried to speak, Ben recalls. I would start a sentence in English and finish it in Mandarin without noticing. Conversations with people who only spoke English were incredibly frustrating for everyone involved. Ben required intensive therapy to learn conscious control over his language selection, essentially learning to choose which language to speak rather than allowing his brain to default to whichever linguistic system activated spontaneously. This process was complicated by the fact that conventional approaches to teaching language control assume deliberate learning rather than spontaneous acquisition. We had to develop completely new therapeutic approaches for Ben because nothing in our professional training prepared us for someone who had gained multiple languages spontaneously rather than through learning, explains Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, the speech therapist who worked with Ben during his recovery. The therapy focused on building conscious awareness of linguistic processing and developing mental triggers that would allow Ben to deliberately select which language to use in different situations. Progress was slow and frustrating, but eventually Ben developed enough control to function in normal English-speaking environments while retaining access to his other languages when needed. Ben's language abilities also created unexpected opportunities. As news of his case spread through scientific communities, he was invited to participate in research studies at universities around the world. These studies provided income that exceeded his previous construction earnings while contributing to scientific understanding of language and neuroplasticity. I went from being a carpenter who could barely afford rent to being paid to travel the world participating in brain research, Ben reflects. It was surreal, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. If my weird situation could help scientists understand the brain better, then maybe the accident happened for a reason. Ben's participation in research studies also led to unexpected social connections. He met other individuals with unusual neurological conditions, neuroscientists fascinated by his case, and people from various cultural backgrounds who were amazed to meet someone who could speak their languages despite never having learned them. These connections expanded Ben's worldview in ways that his previous life hadn't provided opportunities for. He developed friendships with Chinese researchers, Arabic-speaking medical professionals, Russian neuroscientists and Japanese linguists, relationships that would have been impossible without his spontaneous language acquisition. Before the accident, my world was pretty small. Brisbane, construction work, rugby, pub with mates, Ben explains. After the accident, I was suddenly connected to people and cultures all over the world. It was like gaining languages opened doors I didn't even know existed. Ben's case also attracted media attention that transformed him into a public figure. News outlets worldwide covered the story of the man who woke from a coma speaking languages he had never learned. Documentary filmmakers, podcasters, and television programs featured his story as an example of the brain's mysterious capabilities. The media attention brought both opportunities and challenges. Ben became a sought-after speaker for conferences on neuroscience, language learning, and human potential. But he also faced skepticism from people who suspected his story was exaggerated or fraudulent. I had to prove my language abilities constantly, Ben recalls. People would test me by bringing native speakers to verify that I really could speak their languages fluently. Some people thought it was a hoax, or that I was somehow faking it for attention. That was frustrating because I never asked for any of this. It just happened to me. Academic verification of Ben's abilities eventually silenced most skeptics. Multiple independent linguistic assessments confirmed that Ben possessed genuine native-level proficiency across all 7 languages, including cultural knowledge and idiomatic usage that would be nearly impossible to fake convincingly. 3 years after the accident, Ben's life had stabilized into a new normal that was radically different from his pre-accident existence. He had become a research participant, conference speaker, and informal consultant for language learning companies interested in understanding how his spontaneous acquisition compared to conventional learning methods. But perhaps most significantly, Ben had developed a deeper appreciation for the mysterious capabilities of the human mind and the potential that might exist within everyone, if the right conditions triggered its activation. Before the accident, I thought I knew my limits, Ben reflects. I wasn't smart, wasn't good at learning, wasn't going to amount to more than steady work and simple pleasures. The accident showed me that we really don't know what we're capable of until circumstances force our brains to adapt in ways we never imagined. Ben's case continues to influence neuroscience research and theories about language acquisition. His brain has been studied extensively through advanced neuroimaging, providing insights into how multilingual processing works and how neuroplasticity can create capabilities that seem impossible based on conventional understanding. Dr. Chen's ongoing research with Ben has led to new theories about language learning that suggest conventional methods might be inefficient compared to approaches that better align with the brain's natural linguistic processing capabilities. These insights are informing development of new language learning technologies and pedagogical approaches. Ben's case demonstrates that the brain has latent language processing capabilities that we're only beginning to understand, Dr. Chen explains. If we can figure out how to access those capabilities without requiring brain trauma, we might revolutionize how languages are taught and learned. Today at 35 years old, Ben Morrison lives a life that would have been unimaginable before his accident. He works as a translator, language consultant, and research participant while maintaining his relationships with Sarah and his family, who have adapted to his transformed existence. His construction career is over. The physical injuries from the accident prevent the heavy labor that carpentry requires. But his language abilities have created opportunities that provide both financial security and intellectual fulfillment that his previous career never offered. I miss construction sometimes, Ben admits. There was something satisfying about building things with my hands, but I wouldn't trade what I have now. The connections with people worldwide, the contribution to scientific understanding, the realization that human potential is so much greater than we imagine. Ben's story has inspired research into whether similar neurological reorganization might be triggered through less traumatic means, whether the brain's latent capabilities might be accessed through meditation, neurofeedback, or other non-invasive approaches that could benefit people seeking to develop new skills or recover from other types of brain injuries. While no one would recommend brain trauma as a learning method, Ben's case proves that human brains possess far greater adaptive potential than conventional understanding recognizes. His spontaneous language acquisition demonstrates that the boundaries we accept as limitations might simply be lack of circumstances that trigger our hidden capabilities. People ask me if I'm glad the accident happened. Ben reflects. That's complicated. I wouldn't wish brain trauma on anyone, and the recovery was terrible, but the person I've become because of it, with the languages, the opportunities, the expanded worldview, is someone I never could have become otherwise. The accident was horrible, but what emerged from it has been extraordinary. Ben Morrison's legacy extends beyond his personal transformation, to include fundamental questions about human potential and the mysteries of consciousness that neuroscience is still working to understand. His case reminds us that the brain remains one of science's greatest frontiers, full of capabilities that we've barely begun to explore. The construction worker who could barely pass high school French became a polyglot whose abilities challenge everything linguists thought they knew about language acquisition. His journey from ordinary life, through devastating injury to extraordinary transformation, proves that human potential is far less limited than we imagine, that perhaps everyone possesses latent capabilities waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. Ben's story continues to inspire researchers studying neuroplasticity, educators rethinking language instruction, and anyone who wonders about the hidden potential that might exist within their own minds. His case stands as proof that the human brain is capable of changes and achievements that seem impossible until they happen, and that sometimes the most profound transformations occur not through deliberate effort, but through the brain's mysterious ability to reorganize itself in ways we don't yet fully understand.